الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Hi and welcome to Worlds Apart, a program that is dedicated to speaking the truth in love. I'm your host, Rommel Hussain, and today we have with us Jay Smith, who will be speaking to us about ideologies that are worlds apart. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Excellent. What I'd like to speak about today specifically is about the differences between Jesus and Muhammad. Now, how does a Muslim see Jesus?
That's a great, the great thing about Jesus, I have Muslims who come up to me all the time and they say, you know, Mr. Smith, we love Jesus. And since we love Jesus, why is it you don't like Muhammad? And I said, that's the point. The point is, who doesn't love Jesus? Everybody loves Jesus. I mean, there's so much to say about Jesus. I don't know of anybody that does not love Jesus. Even Madonna loves Jesus. The demons are fearful of him. But certainly, Muslims have to love Jesus. He is one of the greatest of the prophets. He was second only to Muhammad in importance as far as they're concerned. They believe that he did come. They believe, if you look at the references, about 93 references to Jesus in the Quran. He's known as Isa. But even that word itself has got a problem, and we'll talk more about that. They see him as, in a sense, his mission is not really completed. He was taken up to heaven before his mission could be completed, so he has to come a second time. And so therefore he will come a second time. And then he'll live for about 43 years on earth. He'll have 7 children, have 7 children. He will destroy all the crosses, kill all the pigs, and then he will die, and then he will rise. So that's what, not every Muslim is aware of that because they've not read the traditions that speak about those events. But they see him as certainly the greatest, except for Muhammad, as of all the prophets.
And specifically, do they believe that he was crucified?
No. Now this is, Muslims cannot, and that's the reason why. It's not that they wish not to or that they have a problem with that. It's because the Quran is very clear that he did not die. In Surah 4, Ayah 157. In Surah 4, Ayah 157, and let me just read it here to you so that I get it correctly, and I'm reading in the English. It says, "And because of their saying, we killed Messiah, Isa, son of Miriam, the messenger of Allah, but they killed him not, nor crucified him, but it appeared so to them. And those who differ therein are full of doubts." And it goes on. So they thought they had killed him, but they killed him not. The image of Jesus was put on another man. So it's implying, it doesn't say specifically, but it's implying that that man died in his place. Now, that's Surah 4, 157. Muslims who read that verse are very clear that Jesus did not die. The problem is, obviously, there are some contradictions because then you go to Surah 19. If you look at Surah 19, Ayah 33, it's very clear that Jesus says of himself, "Blessed be me, the day I was born, the day I die, and the day I rise again." Present continuous. So Jesus himself claims about his death and resurrection in Surah 19, Ayah 33. And when Muslims try to say, no, this is a future rendition, that he's going to come back in the future and die, that's what it's referring to. You've got a problem because in verse 15 of that same chapter, in Surah 19, John the Baptist has the same thing said about him. Blessed be he, the day he was born, the day he died, and the day he rises again. Now, no one supposes that John the Baptist is going to come back in the future. So how can you deal with that? You've got a real problem within Surah 19. They both contradict Surah 4, 157, but it gets even worse than that. Rommel, go to Surah 3, Ayah 55. In Surah 3, Ayah 55, the word in English, let me just read it, because in English it's very interesting. In English, it's very clear that Allah is speaking to Jesus here, and he says that I will take you unto myself. Let me just read it. "And when Allah said, O Isa, I will make you sleep and raise you to myself and clear you." That's what it says in the English translation. But in the Arabic, it's mu'atafaka. Now, what does mu'atafaka mean?
I don't know.
I will kill you.
Okay.
In the Arabic, it's very clear, I will kill you and take you myself.
Wow.
So in the Arabic, it's very clear that God kills Jesus, which supports the crucifixion.
That's right.
But since 1935, all English translations now have, I will take you, I will put you to sleep.
Okay.
Which is not a good rendition. There's no reference anywhere else in the Quran that uses muwatafaka in that context, except in this Surah 355. So you can see there's an agenda here by the Muslims who are translating this. They don't want people to read this in the English language. That also confronts Surah 4, 157. So certainly the Quran has an internal contradiction on this issue. Did Jesus die? The Quran is confused. Muslims, however, are not. They're very clear he did not die, unless you talk about the Ahmadiyyas. The Ahmadiyyas is a particular sect within Islam that believe he was on the cross, he did not die, he swooned. They took him off the cross, he was unconscious. They could not recognize that he was unconscious, though they knew what death looked like. They didn't check his pulse. They put him into the grave. They put a 2-ton stone over top that grave. 16 men were posted outside of the centurion's men. These are the creme de la creme of the Roman guards. And 3 days later, suddenly, he woke up from his stupor, realized where he was, threw out that 2-ton stone all by him, a 2-ton stone all by himself, overpowered the 16 guards, and then he went to Kashmir. And he died in Kashmir,
ridiculous
according to Ahmadiyya. So you can see that it's almost foolish what the Ahmadiyya are trying to say. Nonetheless, for a Muslim, a Sunni, and Shiite, they do not believe Jesus died. Now that has huge complications, because history stands against that. Where is there any historian that will agree with that? Remember, historians referred to that event almost immediately. Within 20 years of Christ's death, you have two Greek historians, Thales and Phlegon, who are debating over this issue. In 52 AD, Phlegon and Thales are debating whether or not when Jesus died on the cross that the sun went dark and the earth shook. They weren't Christians. These were secular Greek men who were arguing that event. Tacitus, who is a Roman historian, wrote about that event. He talks about the death of Jesus Christ. And we have to use Tacitus because Tacitus gives us the time period. It happened during the time of Pontius Pilate, there in Judea, under the rule of Tiberius. So we know it happened in 33 AD. So there's a historical context. It's very clear that Jesus did die. Tacitus was a Roman. Josephus, who was a Jew, he writes about it in the beginning of the second century. Not only does he describe Jesus' death as a Jew, but he also says there are certain Christians who believe that he rose again. It's the first and only reference, secular reference we have outside of the gospel account of Jesus' resurrection from somebody who is not a Christian. So there are three different historians, Jews, Roman, and Jews, Greek, Roman, and Jews who agree that Jesus died. So the Quran has to deal with that, because this is from the same time period that Jesus died. Within 20 years, they were talking about it.
So what you're saying, it's a historical fact. Absolutely. So they have to contend with that.
And there's no historian that disagrees. There's not one historian that I know of that actually confronts that. Outside of a little-known case named a man named Basilides. Basilides in the late 2nd century does refer to the fact that Jesus cannot die. He was a Gnostic. He did not believe that God could take on bodily form and would die. So he had a theological problem with that. And that looks like may be the source for where the Muslims are coming from. They may have taken his source. But he's writing much too late to be authoritative.
What else do they believe about Jesus? Was he an apostle? Do they believe in his deity? Do they consider the virgin birth? Run us through some of these things.
No, now they do consider the virgin birth, of course. In Surah 19, Ayah 20, it's there. Do they believe in his divinity? Absolutely not. And we're going to spend a whole talk just looking at Jesus' divinity. So we won't expand on that here. Because we're going to look at Surah 5, Ayah 72. We're going to look at Surah 5, Ayah 115. We're going to look at Surah 6, Ayah 101. And we're specifically going to look at Surah 7, Ayah 171. Those are the 4 references we need to look at his divinity. Let's hold off on that. And let's say, what else do they believe? And this is one thing I like to do with Muslims. I say, stop, Muslims, let me ask you something. Is Jesus more than a prophet? They said, no, he's nothing more than a prophet. I said, hold on a minute. Is he the greatest of all prophets? He said, no. Muhammad is the greatest. I said, well, let's see if your Quran agrees. And I'm going to take him to 4 references. I want you to do the same thing right now. And those who are watching, look at 4 references in the Quran. I'm going to take you to 4 references and ask the question, who is the greater, Muhammad or Jesus? Just starting with the Quran.
Okay.
Let's do that right now.
Yes, please.
Let's start with Surah 19, Ayah 20. Surah 19, Ayah 20 says very clearly that Jesus was born of a virgin. And that's why every Muslim believes that the Virgin Mary, bore Jesus. There's not a Muslim that disbelieves that, because they have to argue with their own Quran. Was Muhammad born of a virgin?
No.
No. Was Muhammad born miraculously?
No.
So there's nothing special about Muhammad's birth. But Jesus had a special birth.
Yes.
And why should he be born of a virgin? See, Muslims don't know why. Every Muslim I asked this question, I said, why specifically should he be born of a virgin? They don't know, because the Quran doesn't tell them. So what are Muslims supposed to do when they don't know something? Surah 10, Ayah 94. Surah 21, Ayah 7 says, if you have any question, go to the people of the book. They're to come to us. Surah 29, Ayah 46. Don't even argue with the Christians. Oh, I love that one. That's a great one. I use at Speaker's Corner every Sunday. Don't even argue with us. You're to come and ask us questions. Surah 4, Ayah 136. All Muslims, go to those scriptures God has given to you from beforehand, the Tawrat and the Injil. They'll go to the Torah, they come to the Injil. They're to come to us. Those are our books. And they're to ask us. So I say, let me tell you why Jesus had to be born of a virgin. You need to go back to Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. Isaiah was very clear. Isaiah gives us the answer. And Isaiah says, for this shall be a sign. Do you hear that, Muslims? Wake up. This shall be a sign. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son. Not a daughter, but a son. That's very important. And he shall be called Emmanuel, God with us.
That's right.
So this son is someone special. Why? Because we know that virgins don't conceive. At least not in my world. Maybe in Australia they do, but I know everywhere else in the world they do not conceive boys or girls. Virgins, that's why we call them that, because they have not had sexual intercourse. Therefore, obviously, how could they conceive unless something miraculous is happening? So when that happens, Isaiah is saying, wake up. This is the sign. Muslims, you need to wake up. That's why it's so important that it's in there in Surah 19, Ayah 20. They don't know the answer. We know the answer. This is to basically to wake them up and say something special is happening here. This child is God with us. Emmanuel. That's the first thing. Then go to Surah 3, Ayah 46. In Surah 3, Ayah 46, Jesus is an infant, and he speaks from the cradle and basically says what he's doing, why he's there. Can an infant speak?
No.
Do you know of any infants that speak?
No.
Impossible. Yet Jesus is able to speak. Did Muhammad speak from the cradle?
No.
Absolutely not. Muhammad was just like you and me. He made some noises like you and I make noises. You have children, you know what it's like.
That's
but
right.
you cannot speak full sentences. Jesus was able to speak from the cradle. So immediately you see that Jesus not only had a birth that's greater than Muhammad's, he also has an infancy that's greater than Muhammad's. 3 verses later, verse 49, chapter 3, verse 49, it says that Jesus as a child takes some clay, makes it into, fashions them into looking like birds, then he blows on them and they fly up into the air.
Wow,
so he creates out of nothing. Could Muhammad do that?
No.
Absolutely not. It says right there, it says that he was able to give sight to the blind. Could Muhammad give sight to the blinds?
No.
It says that he was able to heal the sick. Could Muhammad heal the sick?
No.
And then it says he was able to resuscitate the dead.
Wow.
Could Muhammad resuscitate anybody?
No.
No, he usually killed them.
Yeah, that's
just
right.
the opposite. So here are 4 things that Jesus can do that Muhammad cannot in one verse. Creating out of nothing, giving sight to the blind, healing the sick, and basically resuscitating the dead. Could Muhammad do any of that? Absolutely not. In all categories, Jesus is greater, according to the Quran. Now, that's just 6 things I've shown you. I've got the best one coming next. And here's the real kicker. We started with Surah 19. We're going to end with Surah 19. Okay. Come to Surah 19, Ayah 19, verse 19. And look and see what the angel Gabriel says about Jesus to Mary, his mother. I'm going to give you a righteous son. He is the righteous prophet. Here's the question. What does righteous mean?
Without sin.
That's right. Sinless. Perfect. Holy. Because who can be sinless but God himself? So here is a reference in the Quran that puts Jesus uniquely from everybody else. There is nobody who is sinless but Jesus. Because in the Quran it's very clear every prophet sins. Did you know that?
No.
How about Muhammad? Did Muhammad sin?
Yeah, he was a sinner. Yeah.
Does it say so in the Quran?
I'm not sure actually.
Actually, it does. 3
It does.
times it says that he sins. Muslims have come back. They don't know how to answer this. I've asked this over and over again. Come on, Muslims. Did Muhammad sin? No, he did not sin. Does the Quran agree with it? Yes, it does. Can you show me a verse? Where does it say he was sinless? Nowhere. In fact, it says over and over again, Muhammad, you must ask forgiveness for your sin. You must ask forgiveness for your sin. Muslims say, no, well, that happened before he was a prophet. So I say, go back to Surah 48, Ayah 2. Go back to Surah 48, Ayah 2. It's very clear. Muhammad says, oh, ask forgiveness for the sins you have done and the sins you are yet to do. Proving that even as a prophet, he continued to sin.
Wow.
Proving that even Muhammad was sinful, according to the Quran. They've got to argue with the Quran if they want to say he did any otherwise. But Jesus, according to Surah 19, Ayah 19, never sinned. So now let me ask you now, Rommel, you've heard now 7 things where Jesus is superior to Muhammad. In every category, Jesus is superior in his birth. He's superior in his infancy. He's superior when it comes to healing, when it comes to giving sight. He's superior when comparing to resuscitating dead and creating out of nothing. And he's superior in the fact that he is the only holy, sinless one. That's just with the Quran I'm using. Just with 4 verses, we've been able to prove that. But that's still not good enough.
Why? How can that be not good enough?
Because this Quran then spends the rest of its time denigrating his divinity.
Okay.
Because if he's all these things, what does that say about Jesus? Who can be righteous except God himself? Who can heal and give sight and basically just say with his own words, be, and then it becomes a bird. Now it says in the Quran, with Allah's power. And that's where I confront the Quran. Because the Bible is very clear. And this is where you need to come back to the Bible. That's why I won't stay with the Quran. That just shows me that Jesus is superior to Muhammad in the Quran. Absolutely. And I've never seen a Muslim that can show me other. They don't know what to do with those verses. They don't know what to do with Jesus. Because in every category that's important, he is superior to Muhammad. Proving that he is really the greatest prophet. But it still doesn't go far enough. You've got to come back to the Bible. Because the Bible is very clear that over and over again he claims divinity. Over and over again he claims worship. Over and over again he uses the 4 divine claims. The 4 divine claims. And we can go into that later on when the question comes up, where does Jesus ever say, I am God? We'll go into that at another talk. But that's why you need to come back to see the real claim for Jesus, and that is he is God himself. Thank God that we can say that.
That's right.
Thank God I don't have to go to this book to follow a man named Muhammad. Because even this book is very clear that Jesus is greater than Muhammad. Terrific stuff. See what happens when Muslims try to not only hear this, but how they respond to that.
So then, how does a Muslim see Muhammad? Do they see him just simply as a prophet?
Muhammad is a prophet. They would say he is the seal of prophets, which means he's the greatest of all the prophets. The difficulty with that is we've already shown very clearly that he's certainly not as good as Jesus. He's not as powerful as Jesus, nor can he do anything that Jesus could do. Nowhere did Muhammad ever do any miracles. In fact, he was asked 3 times by the Jews to perform a miracle. He could not. Nowhere could he perform a miracle.
So how was he able to authenticate himself as a true prophet?
Well, obviously, the question needs to be thrown to Muslims. Prove to me he's a prophet. Because every prophet must do 4 things, according to the Bible. The Bible is very clear that every prophet must fulfill 4 criteria to have the office of prophethood. The first criteria is very clear, that the prophet must be in the prophetic race. Every prophet comes through one line that God has chosen. And he chose that right at the time of Abraham. You can see that in Genesis chapter 17. Genesis 17, Abraham comes to God and says, what about my son Ishmael? Remember that?
Yes.
What did God reply? He says, I will bless Ishmael. He will have 12 sons. And from his sons they will multiply the earth. That's the only thing he ever says about Ishmael. Nowhere do we hear about Ishmael anywhere after that. He disappears off the scene.
That's right.
But what's the next verse say? But my covenant is with Isaac. I will bless Ishmael. He will have 12 sons, but my covenant is with Isaac. You can't get clearer than that. So it's obvious that as far as God was concerned, Isaac was different than Ishmael. If we have any doubt, look at chapter 22. In Genesis 22, God comes to Abraham not once, not twice, but 3 times. He comes to Abraham and he says, give me your one and unique son, Isaac. Your one and unique son, Isaac. Hold on a minute, Rommel. Did Abraham have 2 sons at this time? Yes, he did.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Did God forget it?
No.
Was God confused?
No.
Maybe God just made a mistake?
No.
God doesn't make a mistake. We know God doesn't make a mistake. God was purposely saying that. What was God saying? As far as God was concerned, Ishmael was not Abraham's son. Because Ishmael had nothing to do with God. Remember, God had already promised Sarah she was going to have a son. And then Sarah got impatient and she said, well, listen, I'm too barren, I'm much too old, I'm going to give you my slave girl, Hagar. And so that's exactly what she did. So basically, Ishmael is the result of man's impatience. That's why God said, I want your one and unique son. God was making a huge statement at this time. As far as you're concerned, Abraham only had 1 son. Now, we know that all the prophets come through that line, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Even the Quran agrees with that in Surah 29, Ayah 27. In Surah 29, Ayah 27, it mentions that the prophetic line is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It says it right there, and from them the book shall come. So it even mentions that. Now, it also believes that Ishmael is part of that line. The difficulty is, here's the problem. Go to Galatians 4. Paul very clearly says, for there are 2 covenants which represented by 2 women. The covenant of Hagar, which is a slave woman in the covenant of Sarah, who's the free woman. And then what did he say? Hagar has the son who persecuted the free woman's son. This is the woman from Arabia. Isn't that interesting? He even mentions Arabia. Hagar from
That's
Arabia.
right.
So he places it in the right place. And then what does Paul say? You are to be of the free woman's son. You are to have nothing to do with the slave woman's son. We're to have nothing to do with Ishmael. We're to have nothing to do with that line. If Muslims believe that Muhammad is from that line, then we're to have nothing to do with Muhammad. So he does not fulfill that. Secondly, every prophet must do something to prove he's a prophet.
That's right, yeah.
What did Muhammad do to prove he's a prophet? You're either to do a miracle or to do a prophecy. What miracle did Muhammad do? We're still waiting. We're still waiting. Show me a miracle they did in the Quran. Show me one. Not one. All the miracles come in the traditions, which are written 200 years later, because they had to come up with miracles. They started writing them fast and furious, and they're ridiculous miracles. They absolutely are not supported by the historical facts. Splitting the moon and bringing them down to two sides of the earth. Now stop and ask yourself, Rummel, if Muhammad, I have no problem believing that God could do that. But don't you think someone would have observed it in the 7th century?
Of course.
That's a pretty big object. Don't you think it had an impact on the Earth's rotation?
Definitely.
To say nothing of what it would have done to earthquakes and destroyed much of the Earth, and it would have blotted out the sun for days and days. No one observed it. So obviously these are superfluous. Thirdly, every prophet must give a revelation that corresponds with that which has come before. God does not contradict himself. He doesn't say one thing to one prophet and then completely eradicate it by coming and contradicting that in another prophecy. Now you look at these two books. There are just all kinds of contradictions between these two books. Over almost everything we see about God and Jesus and what God is going to do through Jesus is contradicted in this book. You can't tell me that they're the same prophecy. Absolutely not.
No.
And then fourthly, the last one, the last category. We'll end with this one. God has a personal name. He gave it to Moses there in Exodus chapter 3. And what was that name?
Jehovah?
Yahweh, Jehovah, depending on where you put the vowelization. That's God's personal name that he said will be my name forever. Did Muhammad ever know that name?
No.
Is that name anywhere in the Quran?
Not mentioned.
Is that name anywhere in any of the traditions? Is that name on the lips of any Muslim?
No.
How is it they don't even know God's personal name? If he was a great prophet, if he was the greatest prophet, why did he not know the personal name for God? There you go. Strike 4, you're out.
Wow.
So how can he claim to be a prophet? That's why you look at Jesus. Jesus is in the prophetic line. Jesus did miracles all through his ministry. The Quran agrees with that. The Bible agrees with that. I don't think anybody disputes the fact that he could do miracles. He did prophecy, he fulfilled prophecy that's still being fulfilled today. Everything he said is fulfilled, and it corresponds with everything all the other prophecies said. Look and see. In fact, he fulfilled over 300 of the Old Testament prophecies. Jesus himself fulfilled in his own life. And did Jesus know that name?
Oh, of course he did, yes.
Did he not pronounce that name?
Yes.
Did he not claim it for himself?
Yes, I
In
am.
fact,
That's right.
John 8, verse 58. Before Abraham was Yahweh, I am. And look at the reaction of the Jews. They had to take up stones to stone because he was claiming to be God himself. He took on that name for himself. Thank God for Jesus. He fulfills every criteria that a prophet does. Muhammad is basically wipes out on all 4. Come back to Jesus.
Thank you very much, Jay. It's always a pleasure to have you come and share some of your insights with us.
Listen, do you want me to? Let me just say one thing before we end. It's obvious that you can only find a bit of Jesus in this one. You've really got to come back to this book.
Exactly.
To find the real Jesus, the full Jesus, the divine God who becomes man. You've got to come back to this book. So I encourage every one of you Muslims to come. Don't just believe what the Quran says about Jesus. Come back and go from the authentic article. Come on home. Come back to Jesus. He's the man. He's the God who became man for you.
I pray and hope that you found this episode to be informative. If you want to check out a few extra things, please look at the website that will pop up on the screen and you'll be able to research these things, check these things. But most importantly, go back to the Bible. If you're a Muslim, check it out, read it. Until then, we just pray that God will bless you. Thank you.